The lonely widower hired her only to cook, but what he needed most was her heart. The wind screamed through the canyons at winter, wild, merciless, and endless. Snow buried fences and graves alike, until the world itself looked swallowed by silence. And in the heart of it all sat John Callahan, a man hollowed out by time and loss. His fire was dying, his roof creaked, and the echo of a woman's laughter still lingered in the rafters like a ghost refusing to leave. He didn't say her name anymore. Didn't have to. The walls already knew it. 2 years since Mary Callahan had gone into ground behind the barn, lay beneath a crooked oak and a headstone he carved himself. 2 years since the light had gone out of the house, since the song stopped, since supper turned into burnt beans and whiskey. The ranch that once thrived beneath their hands had turned quiet, like the land itself was mourning with him. John rose before dawn every morning out of habit, though he had little reason to. He'd patch a fence, chop some wood, check on the half-starved cattle, and then stare out toward the hills where nothing stirred. Every movement was mechanical, every breath a battle. When the loneliness grew too sharp, he'd pour another drink. But even whiskey couldn't fill the emptiness where her voice used to live. By early December, his food stores had run thin. He burned bread over boiled beans and blackened bacon. One night, as he choked down another flavorless meal, he muttered to no one, "Ain't right, dying slow like this with a full moon watching that." That night, he wrote a short notice on rough paper and sent it to the trading post in town. Help wanted. Cook for winter. Board and pay provided. He tacked it to the post and rode home through falling snow, never expecting anyone would answer. 7 days later, a wagon came rattling down the frozen road. John heard it before he saw it. The creak of wood, the crack of reins, the soft jingle of harness rings. He stepped out onto the porch, a rifle in hand, squinting into the white blur. The wagon stopped before the gate. A figure climbed down. Not a man, as he'd imagined, but a woman, slim, bundled in a heavy gray coat, her skirt dusted with snow and her cheeks raw from wind. She stood tall despite the cold, chin lifted, a satchel clutched tight in her hand. "You Mr. Callahan?" Her voice carried through the storm, firm, not meek. John frowned. "Suppose I am. You lost." "No, sir. I'm here about the job." He blinked. "The cooking?" "Yes." She straightened her shoulders. "I can work hard, I can cook, and I don't complain. I ain't afraid of cold or ghosts, if that's what keeps you up at night." John studied her for a long moment. She was maybe in her early 30s, though the hardship of the frontier had left fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Those eyes, gray as river slate, didn't flinch under his stare. He scratched his beard. Didn't figure on hiring a woman. "Then don't," she said simply, turned to climb back into the wagon. Something in her tone, steady, tired, but proud, stopped him cold. He let out a slow breath that clouded in the air. "Hold on," he muttered. "Suppose a hot meal wouldn't hurt first." Inside, the house was dim and cold. Dust clung to the shelves and cobwebs laced the corners. The stove was crusted with soot. Clara set her satchel down, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work without a word. She moved with quiet purpose, like a woman used to cleaning up other people's ruin. She found flour, beans, a scrap of bacon, and what was left of a winter onion. Within an hour, the smell of food filled the cabin. Something savory and warm, something that made the silence ease just a little. John sat at the table, staring as she ladled stew into 2 chip bowls. "Don't just stare," she said, sliding one toward him. "Eat." He did, slowly. The first spoonful hit like a shock. He hadn't tasted seasoning in months. When the bowl was empty, he looked up. "You cook like my wife used to." "Then she must have been a fine woman," she replied softly, wiping her hands. For the first time in months, he didn't drink after supper. By morning, the wind had picked up again, slamming against the shutters. Claire was already up, feeding the stove, boiling water, and humming, a tune faint and sad. John lay in bed, listening to it. The sound twisted something inside him. It wasn't Mary's song, but it carried the same kind of warmth, the kind that reminded him he was still human. He came into the kitchen later, boots thudding on the wooden floor. "Didn't expect you to stay," he said. Didn't expect to be asked, she replied, pouring coffee. But I figure a deal's a deal. And that was that. Days fell into rhythm. Clara worked from dawn till dark, baking, cleaning, mending, milking, chopping. She never complained, never asked for more than what she was given. John tried to keep his distance, but he found himself watching her, the way she wiped her brow or the soft that escaped when she cooked. At night, he'd sit by the fire, pretending to read, while she darned socks or mended old shirts. Sometimes she caught him looking. Neither spoke about it. There was something heavy that passed between them, unspoken, uncertain, but alive. One night, John came in late from checking the horses. The moon hung low, pale and watchful. Inside, the cabin was dim but warm. Clara was sitting by the fire, her hair loose, her eyes distant. "You talk in your sleep?" she said quietly, not looking up. He stiffened. "That's so. Said a name last night. Mary." John swallowed hard. The room felt smaller suddenly. "She was my wife. Was." He nodded. "Couple years gone now. Fever took her." The silence stretched. Then Clara said, barely above a whisper, "Sometimes I talk to the dead, too. Doesn't mean they listen." John didn't answer. He just poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one her way, and they sat like that for a while. 2 ghosts beside the fire, pretending to be alive. A week later, Clara rode into town for supplies. John stayed behind, splitting logs in the yard. When she returned, her eyes were colder than the wind. "What happened?" he asked. "Folks talk," she said. "Said I'm shacked up here for more than cooking." John's jaw tightened. Eli Drummond been running his mouth again? Didn't say who. Doesn't matter. Just thought you ought to know. He dropped the axe, shoulders stiff. "Ain't their business." "Ain't ours to tell either," she said, brushing past him. That night, John rode into town. At the saloon, Drummond was leaning at the bar, laughing with a couple of ranch hands. John walked straight up, eyes hard as flint. "You keep my name out of your damn mouth, Eli." Drummond smirked. "Or what, Callahan? You'll sick your cook on me?" The next sound was a crash of wood and a burst of shouting. John slammed him into the bar, fists flying, bottles shattered. Men pulled him apart before anyone drew steel. Drummond spat blood and sneered, "You're a fool, Callahan. She'll ruin you same as the last one." John didn't answer. He just left, knuckles bleeding, chest burning, not from rage, but shame. When he got home, Clara was waiting by the door, her face pale. "You went and fought him, didn't you?" He nodded once. "You shouldn't have." "I know." "Then why?" He hesitated. "Guess I couldn't stand him talking like that." Clara looked away. "You can't fight every ghost, John. Some you just learn to live with." She went inside, leaving him standing under the stars, snow drifting against his boots. 2 days later, the storm came. It rolled over the valley like a living thing, howling, furious, endless. The wind ripped shingles off the roof. The barn groaned under the weight of snow, and the sky turned black before noon. They worked side by side, shoving blankets into cracks, securing the doors, piling wood by the stove. The cold clawed at every breath. By nightfall, they were trapped. The storm raged for 3 days. They burned half their firewood and most of their candles. Outside, the world was buried in white. Inside, the small cabin flickered with warmth and fear. John sat by the window, listening to the wind tear at the shutters. Clara stirred a pot on the stove, her face lit by firelight. "Storm like this," she said quietly, "makes you feel small, don't it?" He nodded. "Makes you remember who's in charge." "Ain't man, that's for sure." They both smiled faintly. Later, as the wind howled and the walls trembled, John spoke softly, his voice thick with years unshed. "I buried her out there," he said, staring toward the dark window. "Mary, right under that oak. Some nights, I swear I hear her call my name." Clara's hand stilled. She didn't try to comfort him. She just walked over, laid a worn shawl over his shoulders, and whispered, "Then maybe you ain't meant to stop listening. Maybe just to hear someone else's voice, too." She went back to her chair. Outside, the storm began to fade. Inside, The air was warm again, not just from the fire, but from something new, something fragile. John stared into the flames, the ghost of a smile crossing his weathered face. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. Spring came slow that year, like the land wasn't sure it wanted to thaw. The snow melted in crooked veins through the valley, revealing what the cold had buried. Broken fences, half-rotted feed, and the bones of life John Callahan had nearly given up on. But there was light now. It spilled from the kitchen window each dawn, golden and steady. The sound of humming and the smell of biscuits meant Clarabelle was already awake. Sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a piece of twine. John never said it aloud, but that light, her light, had kept the place alive as much as the sun had. They worked the land side by side, day after day. The cows grew stronger, the creeks swelled with meltwater, and the hills around them turned green again. Sometimes, when John rode the fence line, he'd catch sight of Clara hanging laundry by the barn. Her skirt tugged by the wind, her laughter carried on it. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost watching the living. He felt part of the world again. Still, every night when he sat by the fire, he caught himself reaching for Mary's rocking chair and stopping halfway. The ache hadn't gone, it had just changed shape. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Clara brought supper to the table. Stew, hot bread, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. John sat opposite her, his shirt still dusty from work. They ate in near silence, as they often did. But tonight, her eyes lingered on the empty chair beside him, the one Mary used to sit in. "You ever think she'd mind me sitting there?" she asked quietly. John froze. "Mary? No, I don't reckon she'd mind anyone with good manners." Clara smiled faintly. "Good manners, huh? That's a low bar." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. Instead, he said, "You remind me of her sometimes." She met his gaze, steady but sad. "Then maybe I ought to stop." "Don't," he said too quickly. Then softer, "Don't." The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was full, heavy with all the words they hadn't yet learned how to say. The thaw brought more than spring. It brought gossip. Word traveled fast in small towns, and faster still when it was cruel. By mid-April, men at the saloon were already talking. The widower and hired help shacked up in that lonely cabin. Eli Drummond, a rancher with more land than decency, was the loudest voice. He'd always had a mean streak, envy wrapped in whiskey. "Callahan's gone soft," he spat one night. "Takin, in some tramp to warm his bed. Ain't decent." The men laughed, because that's what cowards did when truth wasn't required. Clara heard the whispers first in town. She'd gone in for flour and coffee, head down, trying to avoid notice. But even with her bonnet pulled low, she could feel the stares, the quiet snickers. At the general store, Mrs. Hatch leaned across the counter with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "So, Miss Bell, how's life out there with Mr. Callahan? Must be lonely, two of you way out there by yourselves." Clara's hands tightened on the sack of flour. "We keep busy," she said. "Work don't care much for company." Mrs. Hatch's smile widened. "Course not. Still, I'd think you'd miss a woman's circle. You know, proper company." Clara met her eyes. Proper company's hard to find. She left without another word. That night, she didn't speak much during supper. When John finally asked what was wrong, she just said, "People talk, John. They always do. But they're saying things now that'll hurt you more than me." He frowned. "Who's talking? Don't matter who. Just maybe I ought to move on." He slammed his fork down, the sound sharp against the wood. "You ain't moving on account of cowards. You've done nothing wrong here. I know, but sometimes that ain't enough." He leaned forward, voice low. "Let him talk. You and me, we know what's true." She stared at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "All right, John, we'll let him talk." But deep down, she feared the storm those words might bring. It came sooner than either expected. Late one afternoon, John was fixing a fence line when he saw 3 riders coming up the trail. Eli Drummond in the lead, his hat low, a grin crawling across his face. "Afternoon, Callahan," he called, reining in his horse. Heard you're keeping some fine company out here. John's jaw clenched. You say your piece or turn around. Drummond swung a saddlebag from his shoulder and tossed it to ground. That there's mine. Found it missing after your woman came to town. Figure maybe she took a fancy to it. John took a step forward. You call her a thief again and you'll be eating dirt. Drummond smirked. Touchy, ain't ya? She's got you twisted round her finger, old man. The next second, John's fist connected with his jaw. Drummond hit the ground hard, spitting blood, eyes burning. He staggered to his feet, snarling, You'll regret that, Callahan. You and your little whore both. John's hand went for his gun, but Clara's voice cut through the air like a bell. John, don't. She was standing at the edge of the yard, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. John froze. Drummond saw the hesitation, grinned through bloody teeth, and spat in the dirt. Ain't over, he hissed, before climbing on his horse and riding off. That night, Clara cleaned the blood from John's knuckles. He sat silent, staring at the fire, jaw tight. You can't keep letting men like him pull you down, she said softly. I ain't letting him, John growled. He started it. And you finished it. Now what? You think he'll forget? Men like him don't stop till someone gets hurt. He didn't answer. The flames crackled, painting shadows across his face. She sighed, dipping the cloth in warm water again. You don't have to fight for me, John. He looked up then, eyes full of something heavy and raw. Maybe I ain't fighting for you. Maybe I'm fighting for what's right. Clara met his gaze and whispered, and maybe what's right don't always mean we need it. Days passed in uneasy quiet. John kept to his work. Clara kept to her chores. But beneath it all, the air between them had changed, thicker, charged. When he passed her in the kitchen, their hands brushed once. Just once. But the touch lingered like a spark that neither dared to name. One evening, as thunder rolled in the distance, she found him sitting on the porch, rolling a cigarette with slow, deliberate fingers. You ever think maybe the world don't owe us peace? She asked, standing beside him. He smiled faintly. Ain't about what it owes. It's about what we take anyway. And what if it don't want to give? Then we take it twice. The way he said it, steady, quiet, sure, made her heart trip. For the first time since her husband's death, she realized she wasn't just breathing anymore. She was living. The storm broke that night, not rain but fire. A spark from the chimney caught the barn roof. The wind did the rest. By the time Clara smelled the smoke, the flames were already roaring. John, she screamed, running into the yard, skirts whipping around her legs. John burst from the house, rifle still in hand. The barn glowed orange against the night sky, horses kicking in panic. He didn't hesitate. He charged straight into the smoke. Clara grabbed buckets from the well, throwing water wherever she could. Sparks bit her skin. The heat stole her breath. Inside, John fought the blaze, cutting ropes, slapping terrified horses toward the door. His coat caught fire. He tore it off, shouting for Clara. Get back. I'm not leaving. They stumbled out just as the roof gave way, collapsing in a thunder of sparks and flame. The fire devoured what was left. Hay, tools, everything. When it was over, the barn was nothing but embers. 3 horses gone, the rest scattered. John stood there in the ruins, shoulders sagging, ash smeared across his face. Clara came beside him, breathless, eyes wet. We saved what we could, she said softly. He shook his head. Wasn't enough. It's never enough, John, but it's something. He looked at her then, not as the cook he'd hired, not as a stranger who'd come out of the snow, but as the only person left who'd refused to leave him burning alone. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and rain. Clara reached out, resting her hand on his. He didn't pull away. The next morning, the sun rose pale and red over the valley. Smoke curled upward, thin and tired, from the charred barn. Clara stood at the doorway, watching John shovel ash in silence. He worked slow, steady, like a man bearing more than just what he'd lost overnight. When he paused, she stepped beside him, slipping a piece of bread into his hand. Eat, she said softly. Can't fight the world on an empty stomach. He looked at her, eyes shadowed but warm. I don't know how you do it. Do what? Keep going, after all the loss. She stared out across the blackened yard. You don't stop losing, John. You just learn to carry what's left. He nodded slowly, taking a bite of the bread. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest, and in that quiet, amid the smoke and ruin, something new had taken root, something that neither wind nor fire could burn away. The morning after the storm was eerily still, the kind of stillness that comes after the land's been torn apart and put back together again. The sun rose weakly through a haze of mist, casting the prairie in pale gold. Smoke still drifted from the barn, curling into the soft dawn like ghosts reluctant to leave. Thomas stood at the edge of what was left of his world, charred wood, blackened earth, and silence. His hand was bandaged where he'd cut it trying to save the horses. His heart, though, that was something no cloth could bind. Martha stood a few yards behind him, arms wrapped around herself, her shawl torn from the night's chaos. She looked small against the wreckage, but somehow stronger than the land itself. Her eyes found his, and for a long moment neither spoke. He broke the silence first. I thought I'd lost it all, he murmured, voice hoarse. Turns out I didn't even know what I had. Martha stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her boots crunching over frost-tipped grass. You still got your land, she said softly, and your hands to rebuild. And, her voice faltered, you got folks who care whether you stand or fall. He turned to face her, the early sun lighting the gray in his beard, the sorrow in his eyes. I didn't think I needed anyone, he said. Been telling myself that for years. He took a breath that trembled. But last night, when I saw you run out there, throwing water like hellfire itself couldn't stop you. His throat closed up. I realized I was wrong. Martha looked away, blinking hard. You weren't wrong to grieve her, she said. You just forgot how to live after. A long silence settled between them. The prairie wind moved through the burned beams, making them groan like old bones. Then, from the ruins, came a faint sound, soft, delicate. Thomas frowned. You hear that? They followed it to the barn's corner, where a pile of collapsed boards shifted slightly. Beneath, nestled in a shallow space, lay one of the Mares, her flank heaving, burned but alive. She whickered weakly when Thomas knelt beside her, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. You stubborn girl, he whispered, stroking her muzzle. You made it. Martha knelt beside him, pressing a gentle hand to the animal's neck. She held on, she said quietly. Like you. Thomas's gaze lifted to her. Their hands brushed, stood against skin, rough against soft. That brief touch said more than words ever could. They worked side by side all that day, salvaging what they could, feeding what livestock remained, setting up a makeshift pen. Neither spoke much, but there was a rhythm between them now, an unspoken understanding born in smoke and fire. By nightfall, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sky darken over the hills. The stars were timid at first, then bold, spilling across the heavens in white fire. The world smelled of ash and pine sap, and the faint sweetness of cornbread Martha had managed to bake in a salvage pan. Thomas's voice came low, almost to himself. Used to think the fire inside me died with her. Turns out it was just buried. Martha looked into the flames before them, her face warm in the glow. Sometimes God sends someone to help you dig it up again, she said. Then quieter, even if you weren't looking, he studied her, the firelight flickering across his eyes. You believe that? I have to, she replied. Otherwise, I wouldn't come knocking on your door with a pot and 4 hungry mouths. He chuckled softly. You've got grit, Martha. I saw it the moment you stepped off that wagon. And you, she said, meeting his gaze, you've got more heart than you let on. For a long moment, neither moved. The night hummed. The whisper of crickets, the crackle of flame, the slow beating of something neither of them could deny any longer. Days turned into weeks. The ranch began to breathe again. New boards went up where the fire had taken the old. The children, Martha's little ones, help haul water and chase the hens, their laughter breaking the silence that had once haunted the land. Thomas found himself smiling more, cursing less, sleeping deeper. He caught himself listening for her footsteps in the mornings, the scrape of her chair at breakfast, the hum of her voice when she worked. She brought color where there had only been dust. One evening, as the sun bled over the horizon in deep orange streaks, Thomas stood by the corral, watching her hang laundry on the line. The sight stopped him cold. The wind lifted her hair, and the light caught her profile, strong, kind, determined. He realized that it wasn't just gratitude or companionship he felt. It was something deeper, something that scared him worse than fire ever could. Love. He looked down at his hands, callous and scarred, and wondered what right he had to feel that again. Later that night, a knock came at his door. Martha stood there, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. Her eyes held that steady light he'd come to depend on. "Got a minute?" she asked. He nodded, stepping aside. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fire soft on the hearth. She sat at the table, and he joined her. Between them lay a piece of parchment, her writing neat and trembling. "I've been thinking," she began. "The children and I, we can't keep living off your kindness forever. I can take some work in town. Maybe the boarding house." Thomas felt a pang he hadn't expected. "You don't owe me a thing," he said. "But I was hoping," he stopped, jaw tightening. "I was hoping you'd stay." Martha's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then something softer. "Stay? After all that's happened?" He nodded. "You brought life back into this place. Into me. I can't lose that again." Her lips trembled, and she looked down, tears glinting in the firelight. "You sure it's not just the loneliness talking, Thomas?" He reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "Loneliness don't build fences or teach kids to laugh again. That's you. You did that." For a long time, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she turned her hand to hold his. "You've got a good heart, Thomas Gray," she whispered. "You just forgot where you left it." He smiled faintly. "And you reminded me." The next morning, the ranch woke to laughter and the smell of fresh bread. The children ran through the yard, chasing a puppy Thomas had brought home from the trading post. Martha leaned against the fence, watching them, sunlight dancing in her hair. Thomas joined her, hands tucked into his vest pockets. "Ain't much," he said, nodding toward the land. "But it's ours." She looked at him, really looked. "Ours," she echoed. He reached for her hand then, not with hesitation, but certainty. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and earth. In that wide, open silence, something mended that had been broken for a long, long time. Narrator's reflection, closing voice. "They say a man's heart dies once, when he loses the one he loves. But the truth is, hearts don't die easy. They just wait for something or someone to remind them how to beat again." Thomas Gray thought he hired her just to cook. What he didn't know was she'd feed him something far rarer. Hope. And on that quiet stretch of prairie, between fire and forgiveness, two souls found what the frontier had stolen from them: the courage to love again.